And this was one of those days, remember those 5-foot snow, back-to-back snowstorms, so we had 5 feet of snow on the ground? But in March, it started to get warm, so you're there with mounds of frozen snow, but it was a little warm, so we're both there in jeans and baseball caps and just kind of spring jackets, but it was still one of those rainy, bone-chilling, raw days. And, you know, I'm looking at this, and in that split second, I was just flooded with 1,000 thoughts, because that square marked a grave that during the Revolutionary War was just a mass grave. Before the Revolutionary War, it was for slaves. You know, just, we don't know who they are, they have no worth, we're just going to bury them all in this mass grave because they're not worthy of the time and expense to have a proper burial. And during the Revolutionary War, that's the same thing that happened with many of the soldiers. Just threw them right in on that mass grave. And for nearly 200 years, that mass grave went unmarked until the bicentennial of our nation, that someone said, we need to give this site the proper honor and respect that it is due. And then they put up plaques what it is. And I sat there thinking about those soldiers who were buried there and who fought, who willingly volunteered for the cause because they understood that freedom is the light for which many men and women have died in darkness. And Maria turned to me and she said, if you choose to continue, you are going to have to die to yourself, to your reputation, for your need to be right. Any of you who are Catholic, if you know the litany of humility, all those things, the desire to be appreciated, you are going to have to die to yourself like never before. And it's not unlike these men and women had to die. And we sat there and just soaked it in for what seemed like hours, but I wasn't that late for the next event, so it wasn't hours. But I thought of Nathaniel Greene. And many of you may know who Nathaniel Greene is because he was the general who won the South for Washington. But he was a Quaker. Before he joined the army, he was a Quaker. And when he saw what was going on, when he heard the proclamations of what independence would look like, what freedom would look like, he was stirred to enlist. But at first he was rejected because he had a limp. But he was passionate about it. And I read recently that he met George Washington at a social function and shared with him his desire to get involved. And Washington recognized that passion in him, overlooked the limp that other people said, this is going to be a handicap for you, and brought him on. And doing that, because he was from a Quaker, a pacifist family who was very well off, he was disinherited. And he was actually even kicked out of the Quaker church. But he got it. And he knew that these sacrifices were worth making. And he ended up being promoted to the general who won the South. And if you read his letters and you look at his strategy about how he won the South, we can learn lessons from that. His letters talk about, he lost probably more battles until he won the big one. And you read the letters and take the lessons from him. He said, you fight, you get beat, you get up, and you fight again. You get beat, and you get up, and you fight again until eventually you win. But you learn from each lesson. And I think we can learn from what he did. He looked at Cornwallis coming in, you know, and the British troops, they had their fancy uniforms. They were well fed. They marched onto the battlefield with a fife and drum. It was a big show. They had the resources. They were the establishment. He knew that if you went head-to-head with that, he wasn't going to win, as you, George Washington, can remember from reading those letters. So he had to outsmart them. And what he did was he went to the mountain men. Now, and some of these letters describe them in the buckskin-clad, coon-capped mountain men. And he shared with them, you don't have an inheritance to leave for your children. You don't have a lot of wealth and riches to pass on as a legacy, but you can leave a legacy of freedom. And he cast before them what a free America would look like, and what a free America would mean for their children, that their children can enjoy the freedom that they were going to fight for. and create a better lives for themselves. And these men that he inspired to enlist in his army caught the vision so much that their strategy was to exhaust Cornwallis. And that's what they did. They would lose, but they'd get right back up again. And you read some of those letters to Washington where he says, I'm very disheartened by the lack of resources that we have. And he would describe how these mountain men would come and they would have holes in their shoes, holes in their boots. And the army had no boots to give to them, so they were fighting with barefoot, running onto the battlefield barefoot. And if you read some of the letters from the northern battles, especially the Battle of Brandywine, you would read how their bare feet in the snow would leave trails of blood. But they didn't quit because they knew what they were fighting for, and they were willing to give their lives. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. We have to have that same commitment. We have to have that same determination. This is the Second American Revolution. And right now, give me a chance to get caught up on my notes. Right now, the only thing keeping us from winning that Second American Revolution is ourselves. And what I mean by that is, will we be intimidated out of this battle? Will we give up because it costs us something? Will we quit because that cost is great? If we can answer these questions in the affirmative, that we are not going to give up, I think we're about 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 election cycles from restoring America to what she was. But we have to. Because there are so many veterans in the room, I'll share with you an experience that I had on the campaign trail. We were at an Elks Lodge, my sister and I, and there was a veteran who, not a Republican, not a Democrat, he's an independent, not necessarily part of the Tea Party, because he thought they were extremists. But as he watched me on the campaign trail again, like that server at the banquet, and like so many Americans, when they dismiss the media bias and listen to the message, they go, maybe I am. This gentleman, George, reached his hand across the table and he said, you cannot give up. Please keep going. And he shared with me how when he came back from deployment overseas, people would spit on him and they would curse him. But he said, that hurt, but I would continue. And I would march on home because I knew what I was fighting for. And I knew that the America I was fighting for was great, even if they were ignorant and did not. I took that shame because I knew, even if they didn't. He said, but what I see happening now, he said, that hurts the same. Because the men and women we elected to protect our country are the ones who are destroying it. He said, it hurts the same. What their actions hurt just as much as when those ignorant people spit on me. He said, you cannot give up. And I share that message with you tonight. You cannot give up. You have amazing candidates. Now, I don't know if that's because Virginia's so big that by ratio, my state can fit in your pocket, or if that's because you guys are so successful at spreading the message. But you've got amazing candidates, whether it's in the state legislature or those who are rumored to run for U.S. Senate. Get behind the candidates that you want serving in Richmond and you want serving in D.C. Don't listen to the hype. My campaign is a perfect example. We didn't have the organization. We could never take out a 40-year entrenched incumbent. But the difference was, the Republican I was challenging was really a liberal. All those bills that you talked about, that our speakers talked about, cap and trade, all those constitutional violations, he supported them. We had no choice but to continue. So right now, make that pledge to yourself that you're going to get behind the candidate that you know is going to do what needs to be done in your state and national capital. And you can make that happen. These times require visionaries and leaders. What I mean by visionaries and leaders are visionaries are those who see how the impossible can become possible. And then they share that vision with the leaders. They cast that vision like Nathaniel Green did to the leaders who then take it into their community. They look beyond the hype. They look beyond what the so-called experts are saying is impossible to happen. And the visionaries and leaders make the impossible possible. Now I want to ask you one thing. I know that, like Nathaniel Green, you fight, you get beat, you learn your lessons, but you get up and you fight again. Learn a lesson from my campaign in that after the primary, whoever your candidates end up being, make sure you unite. Make sure you unite. Because right now, in this battle of pundits, right now, they're trying to discredit the Tea Party movement. They're trying to say that your mistake was that you got behind flawed candidates like me and Sharon Engel. The reason why they're putting this out there is because they don't want you to see what really happened. You spoke. You said enough is enough. If the only thing we got out of my race is that incumbents are going to know you cannot compromise on constitutional principles or the people will have their way, then that's a great thing. But they're trying to say we as Republicans sacrificed that seat because you got behind flawed candidates. But this is why I want to say look at this message. Because from what I know no one's announced, but you've got some great Senate candidates out there that you need to get behind after the primary. You guys are lucky. We didn't have that in Delaware. But in my race, or those races, whether it's Rand Paul and Rubio or me and Sharon Engel, the common denominator is whether or not the establishment embraced them after the party. Whether or not the establishment got behind the candidate that the people chose. Now you look at, they're trying to say Sharon and I weren't experienced or whatever. Well, Mitch McConnell was saying don't vote for Rand, but the very next day he put his arm around him and said, this is our guy. If you can do that, if you can make sure that happens with the candidate that the people choose, we can win. Do not give up. We have a lot of issues that we need to fight for, and it's going to take a little while. But again, like I said, the only thing preventing ourselves from continuing, from winning, from having victory in the Second American Revolution is ourselves. So in conclusion, I want to ask you tonight to once again pledge, the way our founding fathers did, your lives, your fortunes, and your sacred honor, so that our children's grandchildren can enjoy the America that our founding fathers envisioned. God bless you, and God bless America.